Everybody, this is Gene, and Gene Mackay is an educator, artist, and naturalist, and will be teaching collecting nature in your sketchbook at Wild Wonder 2024. Welcome to the
Glad to be
show.
here. Sorry about the mix-up.
No, great. Good job. Good job figuring it out and not giving up. Okay, so I think one of the things that I really want to do with this episode is give people a flavor and sort of a taste and preparation for your class and your teaching style. So maybe you could share some of your sketches or paintings and describe like a recent sketching outing where you used this collecting technique. Do you have anything like that that you could show us?
Sure. Yeah. So I love the whole idea of using a sketchbook to kind of collect nature. And maybe if I had been born 150 years ago, I would have been one of those people that went out and collected eggs or bird nests, and it's a good thing and it's illegal. Um, but anyway, that's just, I enjoy kind of building a page, finding things, going out and discovering stuff, and then finding something else. So this is actually what we're going to do in the class, and I'll just say it's finally mushroom season here. So
Yay.
this is a
I'll put you
page
on
that maybe
solo
you can
layout. There we go.
see it. So
Wow.
all of these mushrooms I found in the last week in my backyard. So,
Whoa.
so it was pretty awesome. And then I found some more. So when that happens, I just love to be out, sit down, look at one thing, put it in, go to the next mushroom, put that in. Sometimes I collect them and bring them into my studio because I want to look more carefully, or there's certain things you need to do to identify mushrooms.
Mm.
So that's an example. Another page is sort of beach stuff that,
Mm.
again, like I like to go out and see what's happening on the beach, collect things that way, and then build a page around what I find. This kind of technique works well when it's like small stuff, which
Mm.
I often do because, I might have limited time, and
Mhm.
so sometimes I only have 10 minutes to go out and do a sketch or find something, and then I can put one thing in, one shell, one mushroom, one whatever. The next time I go out, I might add a second, and
Mm.
a third, and so on until I build a page. Or there are times when I have longer and I'm just out on a trail or out in my yard, and I'm just filling a page as I go. So I think
Cool.
it's a useful technique for that.
Yeah, that thanks so much for doing such a good job of sort of describing how this technique would work in different sort of scenarios and everything. And I will ask you more questions about collections in a second, but maybe right now, early on, we could get maybe a description of your teaching style and background with teaching.
Sure. I've been teaching for a long time, and I guess a variety of different things. So some of the teaching that I do is in person, and that works really differently than when I'm online. So I'll just talk about the
Mm,
online stuff because that's sort of a whole new beast. And I started teaching online during the pandemic. And at first, I was a little bit unsure whether I would like that because I love connecting with people in person and being able to see what they're doing and
mhm,
encourage and sort of share and show and, be there. Online, it's a little different. So I find that one of the things that I tend to do is talk about what I'm thinking and
mm,
how I'm doing what I'm doing. So I always start by encouraging people to just take a look at what going to draw. So we always start with observation, and then from there I talk about what I notice, the things that I think might be helpful in terms of doing a drawing. And then we start going. And so I talk through the materials I'm using, the kinds of brushes or paints or the paint colors so that people can follow along. And usually in my classes, people do have the option of either following or just watching and then trying it later. And so then I just talk through the process the whole time. And I like to have people ask questions along the way rather than
Mm,
wait, until like there's a break or something. So I'm hoping that during the Wild Wonder Conference, people will feel, it's a little different. People put stuff in the chat rather than going off mute, but I hope that my moderators will say, hey, Jean, here's a question, and they'll
mhm,
ask. Because usually when something is in the moment, it like
mm,
it's more meaningful when you're asking that question. You need to know it now, not 10 minutes from now, or
yeah,
10 minutes later, you feel like, oh, she's already moved on. I don't want to ask, you know?
mhm,
Um, so that's kind of how I like to do things. And then sometimes online, I will take breaks every 10 or 15 minutes and say, okay, are there any questions? Because sometimes I know people don't want to interrupt,
yeah,
or they're following so intently that they don't think to put a question in the chat or the Q&A, and they don't have time to do that. So when you take a break and you say, all right, let's look at questions now, you leave a little bit of room for that.
mm.
I suppose the other things I do, like at the beginning of a class, I like to tell people what's coming. So I'll say, okay, here's what the goals are. Here's what we're going to do. Then we do it, and then we kind of review, like, all right, how'd that go, and you know, get some feedback at the end.
Wow, okay, that was a really great description of your teaching style. I feel like we're only a few minutes into the interview and people should already be able to have like a pretty good idea of, what your class is going to be like, what your style looks like, and your teaching approach. And it's also making me some of your ideas about like asking questions are making me rethink how I'm planning on doing the Q&A during my class. So that was really cool to hear about that. What about materials? Could you talk about the materials people would need for your class?
Yeah, I think I am going to use mushrooms as a subject matter because they are relatively quick to draw, shape
Mm,
wise. They're not too complicated. And I'll talk through kind of how how to draw a mushroom as we go. But I'll also be talking about, collections and stuff. So sorry, my hair is a wreck. Um, so so materials, I think if people just bring their sketchbook and whatever they most like to use, that'll
mhm,
be fine.
okay.
Um, I tend to use a pen and watercolor, but not everybody likes to just jump in with a pen. So if you want to use a pencil first and then pen, or just a pencil and watercolor, or colored pencils, I don't think it really matters. For me in this in Wild Wonder, it's more about the process that you're teaching, and not coming out like with a beautiful journal page. I don't think that that really matters. I think it's like kind of seeing how to do something, following along. And I also think that what I like to use isn't necessarily what
Mm,
somebody else likes to use, right? So I always give a materials list, and it says, this is what I recommend and this is what I use. But I look at other artists' materials list all the time. And
mhm.
sometimes they're like, oh, you got to have these 5 things and these kind of brushes and stuff. And I'm like, okay, but I don't, and I'm not going to the art store to buy more. So use what you have. It all works. It's just a question of like, how you going to get there?
Okay, great. All right, you heard that, everybody. Jean is not providing you any excuses to go on a art supply shopping spree
I know,
for her
but you could if
class.
you got to. I know it's a thing, and so definitely don't let me be the one that stops you.
Okay, so this is just a good moment for me to mention that on a lot of the instructors, they're going to put a supply list or they're going to say whether you need special
Mhm.
supplies or not. Please read that before you take the class and ask a bunch of questions about supplies because that's a one of my pet peeves at the conference is people repeatedly asking about supplies during the Q&A when the instructors already explained that. So it sounds
You
like
know
the
what I also
concept.
did, Marley?
Yeah. Mhm.
I took a photograph of my supplies,
Ooh.
and then I
Mhm.
labeled it so that I so that you can kind of like really see what I'm using, and I'm hoping that that will help too, because there always are like, what's that brush? What's that this? All that, those
Yeah,
kind of questions do come up.
that's a good idea.
Part of it though, so here's what I think is happening. One is we love art supplies. Like, right? Like you want to buy that new thing. What's that brush? What's that kind of paper? What's that, this and that? We're curious about it. So I get where those questions come from. The other thing, it's sort of like, what's the magic salute? What's the
Mm,
magic pencil going to be? What's the
mhm,
magic paint color that I'm going to buy that's going to do it all for me? Right. So I think there isn't like any magic, as you know.
mhm.
It's just figuring out. I think it's figuring out for you the artist, you the nature journaler, what you really like to use. Like, what do
Yeah,
you love? So the
mhm,
paper I love might not be the paper that somebody else loves.
mhm.
It's really very individual. And I think part of journaling is that process of figuring out what works best for you and what you really love using.
Yeah, I totally agree. So just to add a little more to that, I think a lot of people are drawn to you have a characteristic style that I really enjoy looking at. It's amazing to look through your Instagram and everything, and I'll um put up your Instagram here so that people can go look at it. But you have a very characteristic style, and I think that sometimes what happens is people see a certain sketcher, artist, or journaler's style, and they're really drawn to that, and they want to sort of try to work towards something like that. And sometimes, getting really meticulous about researching the materials that that person uses and things like that can help you do like a master
Mhm.
study, as they would call it. And I think you probably have other resources. It sounds like your class at Wild Wonder this year is not going to be like teaching your style of like ink and watercolor. It's more of like a conceptual class, right?
Yeah, I mean, but I think it'll be a little bit of both because as I'm talking about what I'm doing or why I'm doing it, that will sort of come out.
Okay.
And it is interesting, this style kind of question, because it's similar. Like, I think as a nature journaler, there were certainly artists who I liked and admired and looked at their style or looked at different ideas and then, kind of incorporated some of that or tried some of those things. And I was often, I look at journal pieces and I say, how did they do that? Like,
Hmm.
what what materials did that person use to do that feather, to do
Hmm.
that whatever? And I'm very curious about that. And then sometimes I try it and like using that new material, and sometimes I just am like, oh, I can't do that. It's not
Yeah.
it's not for me. So I
Yeah.
think it's worth testing out different things. Just it's like trying on, clothing and saying like, okay, this really fits.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great metaphor for that. Okay, cool. I think that was a really useful conversation for people because I do think that is an interesting that's a whole topic. In and of itself. So let's go into collecting a little bit. Why do you think humans like collecting so much?
Isn't it great? I know. It's there's a cartoon that I recently saw, and it's of this guy sitting at his kitchen table, and it's covered in rocks. And there's like rocks on the shelves behind him. He's just like, he's collected so much that you can't even move anymore. And so I looked at that picture and I thought, like, that's exactly like, it's the extreme example of what we don't want to be doing, right? But the impulse to pick stuff up and look at it and take it home, it's really there. So I don't know exactly what that's about, except people have been doing it for a long, long time. Long time.
Great. Okay, so you mentioned earlier how if you had been born in a different time period, you would have been sort of one of those like Victorian naturalists or whatever, where they just went around shooting and trapping and cutting and picking everything.
Mhm.
But you mentioned um, that today it's better not to do that. Could you talk a little bit about why collecting in a journal can be better?
Well, there's something about a journal, like it lasts. There's a
Mm,
lasting element of it. And I think it also reflects for me my journey as an artist of like where I've been, what I've seen, what I've picked up to draw, what has been fascinating to me over time, over all the years that I've journaled. Whereas I think, if I just have a shelf, I have a shelf of stuff. I think when I'm journaling too, then I'm really looking. It's
Mm,
not just about having this thing,
mm,
it's about looking at it, learning about it, feeling a connection with nature, but I don't need to own it. And I think maybe that's also a good lesson of like, we don't own nature. We own a lot of
mhm.
stuff. we, right? We like to own a lot of stuff. We have a consumer kind of culture.
Yeah,
So the impetus to always sort of like take, draw, is probably, it's there, but I'm not sure that that's, you know, like, what does that do really?
right. So do you think that, so it seems that you're pointing to the fact that, actually physically collecting stuff in nature can lead to some unsustainable human practices. There's, where I live, there's certain succulent species that, have been poached because people
Mm.
get really excited about collecting all these different types of succulents, and they get poached and mailed around the world for really expensive. The habitat gets degraded.
Wow.
There's
Yeah.
cacti. You can't even, when you post pictures of these succulents, you can't even say where they are because people are just going through finding the locations and stealing them. And there's a lot of other examples that we could name, of
Oh,
course,
yeah. I
right?
mean, think about birds.
Yeah,
In the late 1800s, it was the thing. Like people collected bird eggs, they collected birds, then you started wearing them, and next thing you know, whole populations of bird species were absolutely decimated, which is why the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, was so necessary, why Audubon societies were even started, because bird populations were decimated by collectors. Some
right.
for fun, some for, kind of educational purposes and learning, and a lot for market,
Yeah.
for money.
Right. So
So,
there's
yeah.
probably things, it's probably one of those things like it depends, and there are certain things that are super abundant, or, like mushrooms that are ephemeral, and it doesn't damage the like reproductive cycle of the mushroom. Even the most of the organism is below ground or whatever. But it does seem like there's a lot of things that are not sustainable, and our population is so big now. So do you think that, like, in some ways it could be the journaling and sketching could be sort of a surrogate for that human impulse to collect things? Like, what if journaling succulents got sort of more mainstream? Maybe the demand for wild poached succulents would be reduced. Do you think there's a possibility there?
Well, I don't know that I think for people who are poaching plants to sell them, that if they turned into journalers, they would be satisfied. But
Shoot.
I don't, sorry. But I do think that journaling is like for me, and I know I've taught a bunch of classes that are around collecting on paper. And I think it's just opened up a whole new way of thinking for people. So I'll share with you this. One of the things that got me into this was that there was an Italian scholar and collector back in the 1500s, late 1500s, early 1600s. And he had this idea that he wanted to collect on paper everything in the known world at the time.
Whoa.
So he wasn't an artist, but he commissioned artists to paint everything that was known. And he amassed a collection of 10,000 paintings and drawings and sketches. And this collection is everything from shells to gems to rocks and minerals, fruit, weird, deformed things that were found, bird species. It's all kinds of stuff. And it was just this huge, huge, what became known as a paper museum. So Um, so anyway, I just think it's fascinating to look back on things like that even and think about like part of it was wanting it was doing it at this time when art and science were really coming together. And people were trying to know more about the world and the world was really opening up and there were, people going to different continents and discovering new stuff. So it was right at the beginning of that period. But it was also like this record of the wonder of nature. And so I feel like I'm doing the same thing now. Like I'm recording this wonder of what's around me in the world right now. And it's not going to be 10,000 drawings. It's not going to be, the variety of things that were collected, 400 years ago, 500 years ago. But it's still it's important to me. And I guess that's all I care about. So,
Yeah, cool. Really sounds like I'm really excited. I'm getting more and more excited for your class now because it sounds like you've really because I've done collections in my nature journal before and I've taught classes about how to use it as like a nature journaling technique. But it sounds like you've really done a deep dive into sort of like the history and sort of the philosophy and the concept behind it. And I think that's really, really exciting. And I can't wait to see how that shows up in your class. So maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the aspects of it being in a journal because I know that a lot of times it seems like when we go out a nature journal, we might default to certain types of nature journaling without necessarily realizing why we're doing that, or if it actually makes sense for our intentions with nature journaling, or if it makes sense for like the subject matter. So, John Muir Laws uses this terminology of like a species profile is if it's like you draw like one plant and you're like
mhm.
write the name and you have different stuff, which is really common. And I think a lot of people kind of default to that way. And if you went through the Nature Journal Club Facebook page, there would be lots of examples of that. Um, can you compare species profile to collection and when it makes more sense to do one or the other, or just any of your thoughts about those two different approaches?
Yeah. Um, I think part of it is what are you, well, for me, I'm always thinking like, I want to use my nature journal for learning. That's a big part of what I'm doing. I also use it to connect, like to explore and deepen my connection with nature. So if I want to learn about one thing, then that one thing and diving into it approach makes a lot of sense. If I'm wanting to compare that one thing to other things that are similar, then maybe it makes more sense to do a collection. The other thing is that sometimes, like just doing one, like maybe you want to study multiple things, but they're all in the same place.
Hmm.
So maybe the connection and the thing you want to learn about is a particular habitat. So, for example, if I'm studying tide pools, I could just zero in and draw a barnacle and learn all about barnacles, and I have. Or I could do a barnacle and what it's attached to and look at the coralline algae and the mussels and all these other things that are happening in a tide pool, and then it would be a collection page. I think you can also combine those two things. So you can kind of do a collection and then pull something out. Like
Hmm.
maybe there's something in that collection that you like had never seen before or really want to do something more with. So like maybe you find an anemone and you're like, "Oh my god, there's an anemone. I want to learn something more about that." So then, then you focus in on that thing. So I think there's both. I also think that like the one species thing, it's a great way to learn, right? About one particular thing. So to me, that's always a useful journal technique, but it is just one, it is just one way. So I do like to think about like the larger picture of those, of one species and what like not just what is it and how does it live, but like why is it here? What else is it connected to? What else needs that thing? So that you get at that a little bit bigger connection. Um,
Yeah.
and then I also think that whether you're doing like one thing or a whole collection, there are times when like it's not about information. It's not about, oh, I looked up this species and this is the Latin name and this is like all about it. It could be more about a feeling. And I feel like I like to see that in my nature journal and other nature journals. Like I love when people write something that's personal and put
Mm,
themselves in the picture,
mhm,
because then I think you're getting at not just what is this and why is it here, but why did I pick it? Like, what is it that drew me to this? And
mhm.
what's my connection? And putting that on paper, I think is very meaningful in a nature journal.
Yeah, I love that. It's reminding me of a, tide pooling trip I did in January when there were some really low tides, and I started with a collection. And I sort of drew like a quadrant type thing and was putting in different organisms. And then we found this amazing octopus. And it was one of the biggest I had ever seen in this part of the world. And so I then did like a whole zone. I tried to do like a whole drawing about it. And I also wrote about my own experience because it felt like a very deep, like, getting to observe it for so long, was
So
really
great.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marley, are you in California?
Yeah, I'm in California right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. I got to be in California, Southern California in February when the king tides were
Oh,
happening. And it
nice.
was just like, phenomenal because it was all that stuff. And you just could go way out to and see things that you wouldn't normally see. So it was
Yeah.
an East Coaster like me to see your tide pools. Everything's so much bigger, so much more dramatic. It's awesome.
Yeah, I really like the difference. There's a lot of difference between, like, I'm north of San Francisco right now. Um, from here and continuing up north, it really changes quite a bit, and then it's interesting to see Southern California, and then also Baja California changes, quite a bit as well, and there's all this stuff with the temperature. Speaking of low tide, Luz is here reporting from Panama, and they did a low tide event recently and tried to do a giant collection. Um, so we've got people joining in from all over the place in the live conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone
So here's
joining in.
Duluth, because I see that they only had 2 hours. So my thing is like never turn your back on the tide, especially when you're sketching, because you won't make it back. It'll be underwater. But it's so great to sketch it when you're right there and not necessarily rely on photos. I think it's good to snap a photo for like, if you want a color reference or something like that. But I sketch right in the tide pool. I mean, the book is there. I have my notebook and it like a little backpack, and it is great because I think there's something to be said about like what you're looking at. It just comes right through you. The excitement that you're feeling when you're seeing it
Hmm.
goes right on the paper. And it's just such a cool experience. It's totally chaotic and crazy. But you got to jettison some stuff. That's where like I like just a
Yeah.
pen and a sketchbook. Boom, that's it. There's not paints are not coming out like when you're ankle deep in water, but it's super fun to sketch right in the tide pools.
Cool. All right. Well, I feel like I could talk to you about
Yeah,
tide
we could.
pools
Okay, we
for
gotta
a
get
long time also. Okay, so let's go on to I think that was a great conversation about collections and everything. Let's go on to talk about sort of the conference in general. You've taught and attended Wild Wonder before, right?
Yeah.
What were some of the classes you've taught before?
That's a really good question. I think last year I taught nests, about bird
Okay.
nests,
Yeah, I think that
bird
sounds
nest
right
basics.
too. Uh-huh.
And the year before that, I really can't remember.
That's a sign that you
Sorry.
do a lot of teaching. No worries. What about taking classes? Do you take classes or attend any of the talks or anything like that?
I try to attend a few, and my challenge is that I work full time.
Mhm.
So I work at a non nature journaling arts kind of a job.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm always fitting in the art piece in my off hours. And so it's difficult to attend like a lot of daytime kinds of things. So sometimes I end up watching after the fact the programs that I want to see.
Yeah.
Um, but I do really I like watching the videos in part. Like I like to see what other people are doing. I like to see what materials other people are using and what different teaching techniques are. People
Mm.
are exploring. I think all that's fun.
Cool. Well, you've got some dedicated students here because someone just piped in, Diane just piped in with what your class
Oh,
was from.
seaweed. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's right. Thank you, Diane. Yeah, that
Yay.
was fun. That was good.
Cool. Okay. All right. I think, are you ready for the lightning round?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Let me put on our
I didn't know there
lightning.
was one, but now
It's
now that I
just
get it.
like
Okay.
basically short questions, short answer questions to just kind of spice it up a little bit or have some more fun. And I have a little lightning logo that comes on. So,
Okay.
phew.
You got it
Okay,
going on.
yeah, all right. So some of these are yes or no and or just like one word answers, starting
Okay.
with, is coffee an essential art supply?
It's not an essential art supply, but yes, it's an
Okay.
essential thing.
Organized or messy?
Organized,
Do you prefer nature journaling alone or with other people?
alone.
Does your family understand your art?
Absolutely.
Snacks while nature journaling?
Why not?
Are you a perfectionist?
Sometimes.
Ink or graphite?
Ink.
When it comes to art supplies, do you maximize or minimize?
Minimize.
Do you like the big picture or the micro in nature?
I think I like the micro.
Would you rather nature journal on Mars or the deep sea?
Oh, deep sea.
I need to change that question because everybody unanimously answers deep sea.
I want to see
Uh,
some more lightning. Can't come on, like this is a big round. I want to
okay.
can we have some
Phew.
flashes going here? I feel like I'm on a roll. Keep going.
Fast or slow?
Um, it depends.
Okay. And then what face do you make when someone walks up to you and says, "You are so talented, I could never do that"?
Oh, I don't think I can. I don't know.
A slight roll of the eyes maybe, or okay.
I think I just say, oh, yes, you could.
Okay. All right, those are the fast ones. Now we have 4 sort of longer ones. If you could nature journal with any historical figure, who would you they don't have to be an artist per se, but anyone from history that you would wanna go tide pooling or mushroom drawing with?
I would go with Rachel Carson.
Nice. Wow, that would be powerful. And speaking of powerful, if you could have a nature journaling superpower, what superpower would you want?
Time.
Time. Nice. Like to be able to warp time so that you could.
Time just to be, I mean, it's not really a superpower, but it is for me. Like I don't have enough time to be
Yeah,
out in nature and do, the kinds of things I really would like to do.
nice. That's a great one. If you were going to be stuck on a deserted island, with lots of amazing tide pools and plants, and all your survival needs were gonna be, like, taken care of, there's, like, boxes of canned food and can openers and water and whatnot, but you could only bring 5 art supplies. What 5 art supplies would you bring to the deserted island?
5 is a lot.
Okay.
Okay, Marley, 5 is like what I always bring, so I don't even need to be deserted. At all. I wish I had my supplies right in front of me because I'd show you. I would bring my sketchbook as one, a
Okay.
micron pen,
Huh.
maybe 2 microns because then I could have, a brown, sepia, and a black,
Oh,
or a 005 and an O2, which are my go-to pens. And then I suppose a small set of watercolors.
Okay.
is number 3. Number 4 is a small container for water. And I would bring a size number 8 travel brush.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, and then last one for the lightning round is if there was a nature journaling Olympics, which event would you be in?
Do I have any choices?
I mean, you can invent any event, any it could be doing watercolor while pole vaulting, or it could be buying the most art supplies at the art store, or those, you know.
Wow. This is a very timely, given we just had the Olympics kind of question. I think I want to carry the torch.
Nice.
How about that? I think I'd like to carry the torch. I'd like to walk in with other nature journalers. I'd like to pass the torch to others. So that might be my strong suit there.
That's great. That's very different from what anyone has ever answered, and I've been asking that question for a while. So, all right, nice job in the lightning round. I guess I'm gonna have to make it. It sounds like based on your feedback, it needs to be either faster or harder or something. So,
Well, no, I think you need more lightning, and I need a prize, like at the end, the coffee coupon or
oh,
something, it's gotta be
yeah,
sent my
that's okay.
way.
I'm gonna make a note of that. Um, more lightning and a prize. Okay, good feedback.
Just a little
Um,
challenge for you.
oh, Diane says you're a torchbearer already. That's
Oh,
sweet.
very nice.
Okay, so we have like 10 more minutes here. Let's talk about beginners. I think that
Mm,
this conference often attracts a lot of people who are beginners, and the what I was told is that all the classes are intended to be there's no prerequisites or level of skill that's supposed to
right.
be required for any of the classes. So, if you had to give like, what would your number one, and you probably work with a lot of beginners as well, is your number one tip for people who are just getting started?
Um, I probably have a few, but
Okay.
first of all, I do work with beginners, and I usually work in any class, whether it's in person or online. I think there's always a range of skills from beginners to more advanced.
Mhm.
So I think what really is hard for people who are beginning is that self-criticism thing that says,
Mhm.
I don't know if I belong here. And am I good enough? Or can I get good? Or, like that sort of stuff is often running through people's minds. So I think what I love about a mixed class is that everybody is always learning and you're always learning from someone else. And I learn often as much or more from a beginner than I do from someone who's very
Mm.
advanced. Because a
Mhm.
beginner has different questions and sees things in new ways, or may ask a question that I've never hadn't thought about before. So I love it when beginners are in a group and when they are
Mm.
brave enough to ask a question. So maybe one of my pieces of advice is to just be brave, and
Mhm.
to feel like you belong there just as much as anyone else does in the class. And you should feel free to ask stuff. And it's not an interruption, it's not a dumb thing. By asking a question, you kind of you make the instructor think and you make other people think too, or even rethink something that you thought you knew. So that's one thing I would say. um, I also think that you got to practice a little bit. So I do think people are critical, or sometimes like this. You said, Marley, what do I do when someone comes up and says like, "Oh, you're so talented, I could never do that."
Mhm.
And I think of, drawing and nature drawing a little more like learning to play the piano. You got to learn to play the scales, and then you
Mhm.
practice the scales, and you're not playing the concerto
Mhm.
the first year.
Yeah.
You want to be, and you hear it and you say like, "Oh, I love that. I want to work towards that." But you're not. quite there yet. So I think it's not so much that you can't learn it. You can, otherwise we'd tell people, well, you can't play the piano, you're not talented, right? Like that would be stupid if somebody sat down and they wanted to learn the guitar and you're like, well, you can't play the guitar, so why are you learning? Like you're not talented. It doesn't make any sense. And I think art is the same way. Like if you want to be an artist, then be an artist. Like it's not so much about talent. There are certain things that you just need to know how to do, and there's techniques and there's stuff you learn, and you'll just grow and get better and better.
Nice.
So that's a
I
very
100
long answer to what do I tell a beginner, but it's sort of like some beginner thoughts.
Yeah, I 100% agree about the growth mindset and the focus on practice and the unrealistic expectation that you're gonna just start, um, with the concertos, playing concertos right out of the gate. But yeah, you have to do a bunch of scales and hopefully, teach yourself to enjoy the practice part until, so that you can continue to stick with it and then get to the other stuff
Yeah.
later.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is helpful is to pick subjects that are manageable. So if you're a
Mm,
beginner, draw an oak acorn, not the tree. Like start with that and work your way up to the forest. So,
mm,
pick a shell, pick some simple things that are relatively easy shapes that then you can feel sort of good about and advance to the next thing rather than pick a really complicated thing and then feel overwhelmed and like, oh my God, I
mm.
just don't even know what to do with this. So I spent a lot of time drawing acorns. I still do. I still like those, simpler shapes, and I like trying more complicated things too. But I think kind of mirroring a subject with what your skill level is
Mm,
can be helpful too.
that's a really good tip. I haven't really thought about that very much, but that makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'm gonna put your website up here across the bottom so people can check it out. And you have a lot of in-person teaching that you do, and you also, I think you have online teaching people can access through your website too, right?
They can. Yeah, and I
Okay,
just updated the workshops that I have going on this fall, so I have one more
okay.
that I actually am gonna offer about collections, and that's not posted yet.
Ooh. Great. Okay, so I still I can't let you go yet because I have two more things that I want to talk about. There was a lot more, but I'm gonna narrow it down and prioritize here. Could you talk a little bit about the Nature Explorer sketchbook, your book that you have?
Sure. Um, I was asked by, a publisher to write that book for her, and she, specializes in books for kids that are in, kind of late elementary and middle school. And so I have worked with kids at that age a lot. And so I wanted to just have it be not so much like instructional, but a little bit more inspirational and idea oriented with some activities. Um, and so that's what it is. I hear from adults that, some adults like it, and I think it's kind of an ideal thing for a parent or grandparent to use as a tool with their grandchild. Though it could be used, by kids too. I think it's good for sort of eight and up, more than younger than 8. I think younger than 8 is more just about exploring and a little less about, honing artwork or learning
Mhm.
to draw or things like that. I think kids that are a little bit older, that's what they're more geared towards.
Cool. Well, it looks like Nature Sketches already has the book and they like it. So,
So
there's
that's
some
good.
people, some fans in the audience. Okay, and then the last topic that I wanted to talk about is um, what we call something and why that matters. What do you think about the term nature journaling?
What do I think about it?
Yeah, it's for
Yeah,
example,
you know
it
what? I
doesn't
think
seem
it's
like on your website you use that term very much, so I was just curious, like, what do you think about calling like, how do we
yeah,
call what we do
yeah,
and, things like
yep.
that?
I think it's such a great question, Marley, and we could probably talk for an hour just on this topic. I often use sketch over journal, although for myself, I think of my sketchbook is a journal. There's no question about that. Sometimes I wonder if journaling is intimidating for people, but mostly I think of a nature journal. It's like it. First of all, to me, it's a journey about discovering and connecting with nature through drawing. And so a journal, or whether you call it a journal or you call it a sketchbook, it reflects your journey. So I don't know that it matters to me so much what people call it. Sometimes I think of my nature journal as an artist journal too, because I don't only have nature things. Probably 95% are nature, but every now and then I do food or some other thing.
Mhm.
Um, I also think that sometimes a nature journal like gets defined as a certain thing. It's this, but not that. So I like to not have so many rules about what that definition is, um, because I want people to feel free to make it their own and make it reflect their own journey. And so sometimes if people think, oh well, a nature journal has to have information or it has to have this element or that element or whatever. So I think that's why I sometimes avoid I sometimes avoid using that. um,
Mhm. Cool. Yeah, I'm always interested in, um I'm really involved in, teaching nature journaling in Spanish, in places where it's not a known concept, and so
mhm.
I'm often working with other people trying to figure out, like, best ways to translate it and stuff like that, and there's been some really interesting discussions that have come up, and so I do think the name that we call things can have an impact on, like,
Yeah,
how people
yeah,
perceive it, so I wanted to see what your thoughts were on that, so it's cool to hear, sort of how you've thought about it.
yeah, Marley. Like I said, I feel like we could really delve into this, and it might be an interesting thing to consider in Wild Wonder at some point to have a conversation more about that. Because for me, like a sketchbook is a little more like it's a place to work out concepts, and I do
Mhm.
use this. I sometimes just do a sketch that I don't think of as a nature journal thing.
Yeah.
I use it in a different way. Um, but I like the word nature journal. I
Mhm.
just sometimes don't know how other people perceive it. Maybe.
Yeah, great. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. And the last thing I wanted to check with you about is there something that we didn't cover or like something that is really important that you want to mention or that I didn't ask you any questions about?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and I loved the lightning round, so that was good. Um, you know, I don't have anything that I just like feel like is burning, but I hope people come away, feeling like they got some new ideas, maybe, or um, will come to the Wild Wonder session and check out the collections and learn a little bit more about that kind of. Part of it's going to be like how do you set up a page to make a collection work, and part of it's going to be practicing doing that. So I look forward to the Wild Wonder conference and seeing people there.
Great. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to your class. So, and maybe there will be a breakout session there too. So it looks like people in the live chat here enjoying the conversation and learning a lot too. So thank you so much for making the time, and also thank you for persevering and figuring
I'm
out
glad
how
we
to.
got through the technical
Yeah,
difficulty. I don't know what happened there, so thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and it was nice to get a chance to chat with you. It's been a long time of just seeing your name out there and not knowing who you are. really.
Great. All right. All right, everybody. Thanks for
Okay.
joining the live.
Thanks a
Bye.
lot, everybody.